Japan has always been at the top of my travel bucket list. Far off and culturally unique, it's appealed to me for a long time. I've been a fan of various aspects of Japanese culture actually since I was a teenager. And finally, we're here. Morena has booked us a trip to Japan. Officially, this was supposed to be my 40th birthday present, but last year we ended up spending our money elsewhere. This year, with the decline of the yen and the general price increase in Europe, it started to look like Japan is no longer more expensive than anywhere else. So Morena booked us a flight across Europe and Asia, and a day later, here we are, checking into a hotel in Tokyo. The hotel lobby is on the 18th floor of a building in Hibiya, near the Imperial Palace. Our room is on the 24th. This is high enough that my ears pop on the way up in the elevator. I've been fasting all the way from Barcelona because I thought arriving in Asia hungry and on very little sleep would be a funny joke. And it is. We leave our bags in the hotel room. Time to hit the streets. Hey everybody, it's Daniel. Welcome back to Spain to Go, the best podcast in the entire multiverse for all things Spain, and occasionally all things international. I'm recording this in early September. Summer is officially still happening here in Barcelona, but we're still in vacation mode a little bit, and I finally finished up my sort of series of articles about summer travels. So this is Japan. This is the big one. After this, we'll get back to our normal Spain content. I wanted to give a shout out to a few donors before we go on. Ed says, great work. I always look forward to the podcasts. Thank you, Ed. I believe Ed is going to be in Valencia soon. He wrote me a separate email about it. Gloria says, thank you, Daniel, for all of your kind help. I appreciate it. I'm not exactly sure what I have helped you with. Some of my more informational articles, of course, can be found on the blog expatmadrid.com, and other episodes of this podcast are fairly informational. A lot of people get information out of my random wanderings around also that they later appreciate when they're in the places I visit. So thank you, Gloria. Finally, Nancy and Glenn. Nancy and Glenn are reincidentes. Nancy and Glenn have donated multiple times. Reincidente is the Spanish word for somebody who does something over and over again. Nancy and Glenn have donated multiple times. I appreciate that. Nancy had something to say about sobriety. She had her last drink in 1978. Which is great. A lot of the people listening to this podcast are over 40, and, people over 40 often have something to say about sobriety. I got to age 40, and I was still trying to party like a 22-year-old, and that just did not work. My body completely gave up. So, here I am, sober life. I never would have believed that this was how it was going to end up, but here we are. Thanks again to Nancy and Glenn for their very generous contribution. If you would like to donate, you can go to expatmadrid.com/donate. You can donate as much money as you want. I believe starting at €3, you can just pick a number. I appreciate any amount you can send along. Helps me to buy coffee and sparkling water and to keep this podcast free forever. So, expatmadrid.com/donate. Thank you very much. Let's talk about Tokyo nightlife. It looks like Morena might have gotten us a hotel in the red light district. I'm not sure though. There are plenty of bright lights and people, restaurants and bars. Drunk guys are out and about in groups, all wearing black pants and white shirts. I think that's just the style around here. And on several of the street corners, young women are standing dressed as sexy schoolgirls, holding signs saying, "Girls Bar." This may just be a typical Japanese street scene after dark, but neither of us have been here before, and we're a bit confused. We wander up and down the streets near our hotel looking for something to eat. Having little knowledge of the culture and even less of the language, we can only guess what kind of food is served in most places. Morena makes liberal use of the camera function on Google Translate. I just look in the windows. The fact that a lot of restaurants seem to be on the 8th floor of some building doesn't help. Street life in Tokyo is several layers deep, and to have a look at some restaurant involves getting in an elevator and then walking up and down hallways searching for the right place, past massage parlors, thrift stores, and karaoke bars. Finally, we find a barbecue place, Korean or Japanese barbecue, to satisfy my protein needs. We've only been here a few hours, and I'm already worried I might be offending people. Japan is famous, in my mind, for its obsession with politeness. The wet napkin on the table. Should I use it now or after I eat? Am I holding my chopsticks right, or is my poor technique an insult to someone's ancestors? I'm not even making that last bit up. The Uncanny Japan podcast has a whole episode about chopstick etiquette, and there's a long list of rules about it. You could even be summoning evil spirits with your mishandling of a pair of chopsticks. It's totally a thing. In any case, the dinner is cheap and satisfying. Pork belly, various cuts of beef, rice, and kimchi. And we get out before causing some sort of international incident. Afterwards, Morena wants a taiyaki, a waffle in the shape of a fish, filled with red bean paste. I'm hoping for some ice cream, but the Japanese seem to be unfamiliar with the concept of chocolate. Oh well, Morena gets her taiyaki at a street corner waffle shop. I find a small tub of ice cream of indeterminate flavor at 7-Eleven, and we go back to the hotel room to sleep off our jet lag. I feel like I know a bit about Japan already. At least I've read a few books about it. But nothing really prepares you for being on the ground in an Asian country. My first trip to India was pretty shocking. I also went to Thailand that time. A couple years later, I was back in India marrying Morena, so this is my third time in Asia. And so far, Japan is even more surreal than I imagined. Chaotic isn't quite the word. It's well organized and clean. But Tokyo is the world's biggest city, with over 37 million people. Even the quiet areas have a lot going on, I would assume, and I have no idea if where we're staying is a quiet area or not. About those books, though, there's James Clavell's Shogun, which I read as a teenager. That one has recently been made into a miniseries again. It's about political intrigues in medieval Japan and has a lot of great cultural detail. The original PBS miniseries, I think it was probably PBS, was made in the early 80s, I think. I remember seeing that as a kid. The new one is on some network that I don't subscribe to. I don't know if it's any good, but you can check it out if you want. Shogun is the name. I also read a couple of James Clavell's other books. I think he wrote a total of 5 or 6 books eventually about Japan, and I read a few of them and highly recommend them. Shogun is his most famous. There are a couple of books by Haruki Murakami, who writes magical realism, that I've read. I'm not sure what I learned about Japan from Murakami, but his books can be fun to read. And there's Shunryu Suzuki, who wrote an introduction to Zen Buddhism called Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. That is a classic within that small category of books. Then there's Yukio Mishima, who wrote a series of novels about the decline of Japanese culture through the first several decades of the 20th century, all while running a paramilitary organization and organizing a coup attempt. When the coup attempt failed, he committed ritual suicide like one of the old samurai, screaming, "Long live the emperor," and thrusting a sword through his own belly. That's the kind of author biography that would get 20-year-old Daniel on his bike to the nearest bookstore. When I heard about Mishima from a coworker back in my barista days, I went out and got a copy of Spring Snow. Living in Spain a year or two later, I read the rest of the books in the series. They've got sex, death, reincarnation, and plenty of yearning for Japan's imperial past. Maybe not for everyone, but they sure got my youthful brain tingling with thoughts of someday visiting Japan. And while we're on the topic, I can't go without mentioning Dan Carlin's series of podcasts, Supernova in the East, about the Asian and Pacific part of World War II. We don't talk about that nearly as much as we do the battle against fascism in Europe, but it was just as brutal, perhaps more so. The podcast is Hardcore History, and he came out with those several years ago. You might have to pay for them at this point, but it's worth listening to Hardcore History in any case. You can listen to the several more recent free episodes, and if you want to go back later to Supernova in the East, then go do that. Hardcore History is a podcast I recommend a lot. The next day, I'm up early looking for some iced coffee. I managed to get through the formality of purchasing something in a Japanese cafe with a straight face. The girl behind the register shouts a greeting as soon as I walk in. "Irasaimase!" The greeting is then repeated by all the other workers. "Irasaimase! Irasaimase!" I glance at the menu and point. She pours me a large glass of iced coffee, which comes out to 450 yen, under 3 euros. Apparently, to say you want to pay by card, you say cardo, at which point the person behind the register will offer you a recito. I sit down at a long table next to an older guy who's napping with his chin on his chest. This is real iced coffee, strong, cold, and abundant. The Spanish system of here's a shot of espresso and here's an ice cube, mix them as you will, is bullshit. Japan 1, Spain 0. Time to text some Japanophile friends for recommendations. Andrew, out in Madrid, recommends a book called The Japanese Mind by Roger J. Davies and others. I get it with my Audible credits and start listening. From chapter 1, I learned that the Japanese tend to think that people who express themselves openly and clearly are childish. Apparently, the Japanese think of themselves as members of certain groups, a school, a company, a club, more than as individuals, and they value group harmony above all else. Expressing yourself too clearly can start arguments, ruining the group harmony and eventually leading to your exclusion from the group. This approach to communication even applies in dating and marriage. According to the book, silence reigns in conjugal relationships because the couple are in love but too embarrassed to express their feelings in speech. Interesting. I've always wondered, living in the US and in Spain, if there are cultures somewhere that value introverts a bit more. Maybe Japan is one of them. Back at the hotel, Morena wants to go to a fish market. At the Tsukiji outer market, we spot some giant oysters. For a few hundred yen, the guy puts them on the grill for us. A few minutes later, he adds a squirt of soy sauce and hands them over. Payments in cash. Despite the country's reputation for being high-tech, a lot of places in Japan don't take cards. Wandering around the market, we have sushi, skewered wagyu beef, grilled salmon, and more. Around the corner, Yonemoto Coffee claims to have been loved by John Lennon. Next to the fish market is a large Buddhist temple, and we get there just in time for something. A lady at the door tells us to sit in the tourist section, and we do. A minute later, some monks come out. The older one bows before several sacred objects around the altar, while the others sit and play a long, droning song on instruments that sound like kazoos. Eventually, they start chanting. They've been chanting the same 8 verses over and over for about 20 minutes by the time Morena and I leave. I've had a long relationship with Buddhism, of the sort where you sit on pillows in someone's living room and listen to a Dharma talk, maybe meditate for a while. But this is my first contact with actual organized Buddhism, all the way in Asia, and I leave a bit confused. Was that a Buddhist mass? I'm not really sure. According to Wikipedia, the architecture of Tsukiji Temple is famous for its Indian influence, which Morena notices right away. There's actually a lot of Indian influence around Asia, and I'm sure there's considerable backstory there. But before I get too deep into Hindu theology and the avatars of Vishnu, let's talk about the weather. All the research Morena did for this trip suggested that we shouldn't go to Japan in summer. But how bad could it possibly be, I thought. I'm from Arizona after all, so I have a high tolerance for heat. I wasn't worried. I laugh at people who feel hot back in Barcelona. Mild Mediterranean climate got you down? Try growing up in the Sonoran Desert. But listen, Japanese summer is hot, really hot. The sun beats down like a sledgehammer, and there's plenty of humidity to ensure you're constantly sweating through your clothes as well. People deal with the weather in odd ways. A lot of women carry parasols, of course. Others wear arm sleeves when outside, kind of a long glove to keep your arms from tanning. At Uniqlo, they're selling UV protection hoodies. They're not meant to keep you warm, apparently, but to keep the sun off your arms and face. Guys working on construction sites wear puffy vests with little fans installed over their kidneys, presumably to circulate cooler air underneath. I guess they go home at night and plug their vests into a USB port for charging. I deal with the heat by guzzling iced coffees and hanging out in 7-Elevens whenever I need to cool off. Luckily, there's a 7-Eleven on almost every block. Founded in Dallas, Texas in 1927, 7-Eleven was bought by a Japanese company in 1991. In Tokyo, it's your one-stop shop for basic groceries, prepared food, coffee, and other drinks, an ATM, paper products, and much more. Sitting on a riverbank several days later, we're looking around. To our right, there's a lady with her husband and young daughter. The lady is wearing a UV protection hoodie plus a full face mask. All you can see are little slits for her eyes. I figure she's some sort of whack job germaphobe, but Morena says she's covered up to avoid getting sunspots. After a few minutes, her husband wants to take a picture, so she takes the mask off briefly. An interesting fact about Morena is that she likes luxury handbags. It's an Asian thing, apparently. And now that she's in a sales job where people like to show off, she's taking time on our trip to Japan to look at all the luxury thrift shops. For me, any kind of shopping is like torture. I buy 2 packs of black socks and the same t-shirt in 4 different sizes, and I'm done for the year. I've saved my size of Levi's on Amazon, so when one pair wears out, another one appears on my doorstep the next day. In any case, in order to escape the heat, I end up inside more than a few shops, selling used luxury goods. Japanese women take really good care of their bags, Morena says in one such shop in the fashionable Ginza district of Tokyo. Look how these Chanels keep their value. She points at something that costs as much as 7 months of our mortgage. It's black, it's leather, it's bag-shaped. Otherwise, I don't know what to say. I glance at the Rolexes. There's one for 2.8 million yen. That's about 17,000 euros. Another fact about Morena is that she claims she used to live in a slum in Delhi. I'm not sure how literally I should take the word slum here, but much of Delhi isn't what we in the West would call luxurious. And when she was a small-town girl going to university in the big city, she couldn't afford to live in a nice neighborhood. Bored with shopping, I point to something and ask, "So when you were living in the slum, did you ever imagine that someday you'd be in a shop selling Prada bucket hats for 75,000 yen?" She stops what she's doing. "No," she says. "There were times I didn't have 25 cents to buy vegetables." The ramen bars are at first confusing. Usually you order from a machine at the front door. It looks a bit like a cigarette vending machine with 100 small buttons representing different foods and customizations, all in Japanese. For various reasons, I'm trying to avoid massive amounts of gluten these days, but we end up in more than one ramen place. The machine takes your yen and spits out a ticket, which you hand to the waiter. It's fast food, prepared in 2 minutes. People walk in, eat their ramen, and leave. In lieu of ramen, I'm usually able to get a rice bowl of some kind with an extra egg on top. Morena's noodle obsession is such that she sneaks off for breakfast at various ramen bars. A lot of them are open 24 hours a day. "I can't believe I'm eating ramen in Japan," she exclaims at the first place we try. Then, a few minutes later, "It's pretty good, not great." Other Japanese versions of fast food include mild curries, rice with fried pork cutlet on top, drenched in brown sauce, and the seasonal eel bowls. Eel isn't actually half bad. It's fatty and satisfying, even if you only eat a little bit. You can also get it on nigiri sushi, which we do. The sushi restaurants we go to are often large, with several old guys cranking out balls of rice or slices of tuna. Sometimes, though, it's just a lone sushi chef and his wife. My favorite place has about 8 seats at a long bar, and a gruff 70-year-old chef who just slaps the sushi down on the wood in front of you. Fewer plates to wash that way, I guess. At some point, this guy learned how to say "right away, boss" in heavily accented English. So heavily accented that it takes a few tries before I even understand that's what he's saying. It's pretty hilarious, actually. I guess you had to be there. When I was a kid, I read an article in a science magazine about the Japanese bullet train. It seemed like a marvel of technology, whizzing across the country at 200 miles an hour. These days, Spain has a network of high-speed trains that rivals any in the world, but it's still cool to be on a real bullet train in Japan. Tickets from Tokyo to Kyoto cost about 75 euros each, and there's a train every 6 to 8 minutes. Just buy your ticket and hop on the next one. Take that, Ave! In Kyoto, we visit a couple of temples and a bamboo forest on the outskirts of town. The Arashiyama neighborhood still has a lot of historical buildings, so it doesn't look anything like the rest of the city. As part of the tourist vibe, there are some rickshaws around that are being pulled by authentically sweaty Japanese men. The clientele for rickshaw rides seems to be elderly couples. The Tenryuji Zen temple is simple, with tatami floor mats you can sit on to look out at the garden. This is more organized Buddhism. Teenage me would have his mind blown to know that he would one day be sitting in a real Zen temple in Japan, of all places. Quick aside, when I'm trying to pronounce Japanese words, I'm sure I'm doing it completely wrong. I apologize. I don't know the language. Anyway, after visiting the temple, we walk around in the heat, searching for the bamboo forest, which sounds like a good place to cool off. When we find it, it's not a good place to cool off. It's a small forest with blue-green trunks towering over everyone's head, and it's just as hot there as everywhere else. Back at the hotel, there's a Japanese bath. We've taken to Googling rules of etiquette before going anywhere. So, about public baths, we learned that most baths are separated by sex, that you're expected to be fully naked, that tattoos are usually forbidden, and that the Japanese tend not to shave their pubic hair. Morena goes down to the bath one morning while I'm out getting my coffee and enjoys it a lot. I don't manage to fit it into my busy holiday schedule, but I do spend a moment imagining a few old man dicks floating lazily in a pool of hot water, surrounded by a cloud of geriatric pubes. If you open up Google Maps anywhere in Japan, you'll see the swastikas. Officially, the cartographic symbol for a Buddhist temple in Japan is a left-facing swastika. That's why they're all over the maps and on street signs. They're also used as decorative elements at a lot of temples and small shrines around the city. Some of the shrines are a little bigger than one of the old boxy TV sets, sitting on a back street somewhere. People leave offerings of mochi rice balls in front of the tiny altars. I talked about swastikas in India back in the day. Turns out that your favorite Nazi symbol is just a variation on an ancient Asian symbol for good fortune. The word swastika comes from Sanskrit. In Japanese, they're called manji. And the continued use of manji in Japan is a bit controversial. But as an article on asianstudies.org states, removing them would be an announcement that Western sensibilities are de facto global sensibilities. Oh, the irony, in other words, that Europeans would colonize most of Asia only to come back a few decades later as tourists with a list of things that now offend them and need to be changed. It is, after all, not the fault of Buddhists that the symbol has negative connotations for many Westerners. Still, it's a bit strange to see so many of them around. At one point, we're on the metro and a younger guy gets on. Shaved head, lots of dragon tattoos, and a swastika, or manji, pendant around his neck. Tattoos are not common here. So is he a skinhead or a Buddhist monk? I really have no way of knowing. In the center of Kyoto, there's a massive food market, several blocks long. It's in the middle of a larger shopping district. You can walk up and down eating fried shrimp or sushi of various kinds, or ask the stall holders to put something on the grill for you. Some places offer weirder things. Sea urchin to be eaten raw for 1,500 yen. At one stall, I order a bowl of tripe stew, because why not? Gotta get your collagen somehow. Outside in the shopping district, there's a Shinto shrine where they're celebrating some kind of summer festival. This was announced on the first day we were here, with a bit of a procession. It was something like the Spanish Holy Week processions, but instead of an image of Christ, the people were carrying a small tree along with them. At the shrine, a group of men is playing a repetitive sort of song on drums, flutes, and bells, sweating in the heat while a couple of small boys stand nearby fanning them. I say song, but it doesn't really have much rhythm or melody. It's more of a repetitive hypnotic noise, like the kazoo music at the Buddhist temple in Tokyo. Off to the left, people are buying bottles of sake to offer to the gods. A stern-faced police officer does crowd control, keeping a part of the sidewalk clear so people can pass around the gathered crowd. Shinto and Buddhism coexist in Japan. The Shinto gods are called kami, and they're represented in many shrines by an altar, although maybe gods isn't the most accurate word. Kami can represent forces of nature, spirits of ancestors, or elements of the landscape, and they're not actually visible in most shrines. Considered to be formless and beyond human comprehension, they're understood to move around, not stay fixed in a shrine like some idol. In one Shinto temple, we do a little ritual after a local couple explains it to us. Put a coin in the box, then write a wish on a piece of rice paper. Next to us, there's a fountain guarded by dragons. We drop our wishes in the water, ring the gong twice, and pray. I screw the whole thing up by ringing the gong 3 times. Hopefully the kami will forgive me. Also in Kyoto, we visit Nijo Castle, home to the Tokugawa shogunate. This is another pagoda-type building with the curved slope to the roof. Inside, the rooms are divided by thin walls painted with tigers, according to the guide, to intimidate visitors while they waited to see the shogun. A shogun was a sort of military leader. Japan had and has an emperor, but often the de facto ruler was the head of one samurai clan or another. Wikipedia suggests that a good translation for shogun would be generalissimo, which, due to its association with the late dictator Francisco Franco here in Spain, doesn't quite sit well with me. Other rooms in the castle are arranged in a hierarchy according to how close you would have been to the shogun and his top advisors. There's no furniture to speak of. People would just sit around on the tatami mats. The rooms closer to the shogun have natural scenes painted on the walls, representing the 4 seasons. According to the Japanese mind, the sense of the seasons is an important part of Japanese culture, but, it goes on to say, these days most people live in big cities, so nature is something they read about rather than experiencing firsthand. That fits with most of what I've read. From my experience of Japanese literature, you'd get the idea that people spend a lot of time contemplating the melting snow by mountain springs, or writing poetry under the cherry blossoms, rather than wandering through shopping malls. But that was the old days. After World War II, a high-tech economy developed, and a lot of rural areas cleared out. Life became a big city affair. The same has happened in a lot of countries. Yukio Mishima was distraught by the state of Japanese culture in the 60s. Oh no, it's a girl in blue jeans. There's no telling what he'd think of the noise and lights of modern-day urban Japan, the 50-foot billboards of impossibly busty anime girls, the flashing slot machines, and the current state of fashion. After Nijo Castle, we head to a 7-Eleven to buy some water and cool off. Google shows us a restaurant nearby with good reviews, so we go. Although the word restaurant turns out to be a bit generous. At street level, there's nothing but a sandwich board and a narrow staircase stacked with boxes of detergent. It doesn't really look like the entrance to a restaurant. Climbing the stairs, we're already having doubts, but once we're inside, it's even stranger. The restaurant is a bar with 4 seats, a middle-aged Japanese guy and his wife behind the counter, and we're the only customers. Too late to back out now. It's time for a cultural experience. According to Morena, this is an izakaya restaurant, whatever that means. She points to a chalkboard on the wall, which is what we'll be ordering. I guess the guy just cooks what he has on hand. In Spain, they would call this cocina del mercado, and it would be much more pretentious. Here it's pretty good, with about 15 tiny servings of different things crammed onto a small plate. There's some pickled vegetables, a chunk of omelet, a few bites of fish, all served with a small bowl of rice and another bowl of miso soup. On the TV next to us, a daytime talk show is reporting on the Republican National Convention. Donald Trump is speaking, his ear bandaged from the recent assassination attempt. The studio full of Japanese hosts makes some sarcastic comments, which of course I don't understand. Then the TV cuts to Hulk Hogan, who's giving a speech to support the Donald. At the climactic moment of his speech, Hulk reaches down and rips off his black t-shirt, revealing the red Trump Vance 2024 t-shirt he's got on underneath. The Japanese hosts go wild. Our trip also takes us to Osaka. It's another big city full of shopping districts, temples, and restaurants, and crowded with people at all hours. Our hotel is next to the train tracks, and every afternoon, some sexy schoolgirls appear outside the station with signs advertising another girls' bar. The prices on the signs seem awfully low if what they're offering is sex. Is a girls' bar like a strip club? Turns out it's not. I do some research and find that a girls' bar, also known as a hostess club, is a place with cute waitresses who will talk to you and maybe even drink with you, but they offer no further services. A lot of Japanese people work long hours apparently and don't have time to date, but busy men can get a simulacrum of female companionship for the price of a few drinks, plus an hourly charge for the hostess. According to my research, most girls' bars don't accept foreigners, presumably because we might cause embarrassment with our lack of social graces or inability to speak Japanese. Also, prostitution is illegal in Japan, but it's defined rather narrowly, and you may be able to receive fellatio for a nominal fee if you go to a pink salon, although once again, they tend not to accept foreigners. I didn't ask around, that's just what Google says. To my untrained eye, all these cities look pretty similar. I couldn't, for example, say I had a favorite between Tokyo, Kyoto, and Osaka. They all seem like variations on basically the same thing, although maybe I'm just another ignorant American from the middle of nowhere who missed a lot of nuance. I'm reminded of when I moved to Madrid, despite having barely spent time in a real city before. Back then, I felt like any area with a few four-story buildings was pretty cosmopolitan, and generally I was confused by crowds. So for months, I wasn't able to tell the difference between good and bad neighborhoods. I just didn't have a frame of reference. It's possible that the same thing happened to me in Japan. The whole thing just overwhelmed my brain to the point of not being able to form a real opinion. Anyway, in Osaka, we're walking around looking for some dinner. The different types of restaurants are starting to make some sense by now, but most places don't have an English menu, so Morena is still using Google Translate. We end up at some small sushi place where nobody speaks any English. They seat us at the bar, and Morena points to a few things on the menu. We have shark cartilage, scallops with zucchini and mushrooms, mackerel sashimi. Morena eats the grilled sea bream eyeball first. Apparently, the owner of this place is also a singer in a Japanese reggae band. There are posters around about their shows. I get the idea that writing things in English might be a hipsterish design choice out here, even though most people don't speak it or understand much. We order almost the whole menu in the end. It's great and not even expensive after the conversion from yen to euros. Also, as usual after a nice Japanese meal, I'm still hungry. Maybe your average Osakan can get by on 6 bites of fish a day and otherwise fill his belly with rice and pickled vegetables. My Viking metabolism wants more protein. Back in Tokyo before our flight home, Morena has promised me the world's busiest crosswalk. Shibuya Scramble Crossing can allegedly have up to 3,000 pedestrians crossing at the same time. A scramble crossing means that all vehicles are stopped, and people walk across any way they want, even diagonally. After our experiences in Kyoto and Osaka, here in Tokyo it doesn't seem too hot. We take the metro halfway to Shibuya and walk the other half. If I could just interject one complaint about Japan here, it's that the transport is a bit confusing. There are apparently multiple kinds of trains, a metro system with lines indicated by letters, a loop line that's apparently not on the metro network but shares some stations with it, and more. Additionally, it's unclear whether you can buy a combined ticket for multiple trains, whether you need a rail pass, or whether it's a prepaid card from 7-Eleven. The maps in the stations are massive and confusing, and depending on how many stops you're traveling, the price changes. We spend a lot of time squinting at large metro maps, feeding our 100 yen coins into ticket machines, then hoping for the best. I guess transport in the world's largest metro area is bound to be complicated. I'm just saying that if you go, you should do a bit more research than I did, because the whole metro thing isn't exactly user-friendly if you're a foreigner who's half lost anyway. One way or another, between Google Maps and the train system, we get to Shibuya. We spend a few futile minutes looking for a statue of Hachiko, one of Japan's most famous dogs. Somehow we don't find it, but we do find ourselves in a fancy supermarket, where Morena buys a small box of very expensive grapes. A minute later, we're in the train station overlooking the scramble crossing. There's traffic for a minute, then it all stops and the mass of people streams across, moving in every direction at once. After another minute, the traffic starts moving again. The process repeats. We watch the people crossing, then stopping, the buses turning around in a long arc below us. Morena pops an expensive grape in her mouth. Finally, she says, "It's literally just a crosswalk." That's about all I've got for today. I hope you liked this one. I wanted to talk about a lot of other things, but this was getting long enough as it is. I tend to, get worried when things go over 3,000 words, and this is well over 3,000 words. This is over 5,000 words. So I was hoping to talk about the demographic issue in Japan, the aging population, the fact that they have older people continuing to work because there's not a lot of younger people coming up to replace them. I also wanted to talk about World War II, but that would just be, a mess, the whole World War II situation. I'm interested in all the history stuff, but that doesn't mean I have to talk about it on every podcast. So, like I said, Hardcore History with Dan Carlin if you want to hear more of that. I also left out any attempt at doing chronology here. Things are just happening, and most of it doesn't matter where or when. In other words, this did not happen in exactly the order I'm telling the story, but here we are. Thank you once again to the donors, Nancy and Glenn, Gloria, Ed, Robert, I believe, has also donated recently. Thank you to everyone. I appreciate it. expatmadrid.com/donate if you would like to be one of the donors to contribute to the cause here. Also, go to YouTube, Learn Spanish with Daniel. I have not one, not two, but 3 new Spanish videos up there if you're interested in that kind of thing. The first one I did a little bit about the verb saber. Then I did something about saber versus conocer. And then I did a whole video, which is about 20 minutes long, about the truth about Spanish verbs. The truth about Spanish verbs, like why they are more complicated than English verbs, and why I can't just tell you everything about a single verb. Even a single verb is too much for a video of any reasonable length. So, check that out, Learn Spanish with Daniel over on YouTube. Once you go to expatmadrid.com, you can, of course, donate, but you can also read some of the articles that I've written there. I do a lot that doesn't end up as an episode of the podcast, or that maybe does end up as an episode of the podcast, but much later. So you can check that out, expatmadrid.com. If you look for my name, you can follow me on Instagram or something. I don't post a ton on Instagram. I'm not like a big influencer over there, but you can follow me. No problem. If you like this episode, please send me a message. If you don't like this episode, you could also send me a message, but we're 43 minutes in here. I assume if you're still with me, you enjoyed this in some way. So send me a message. Tell me what you want to hear in future episodes. That kind of thing helps me. I can't promise that I'll do every topic, but I will make an attempt to answer questions if you have them. You can subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening. I've got subscriptions on Spotify and on Apple Podcasts. This podcast is also everywhere else. It's on YouTube, on the same Learn Spanish with Daniel channel. I have the podcast set up there too. It's on a separate, podcast feed somehow. I don't know, YouTube things. You can give me a like or a review on some of these platforms also if you want to give me some stars, a star rating. That always helps. I appreciate that. It is, like I said, early September at this point. Spanish news slows down a lot in summer, so there hasn't been that much going on that I really even wanted to write about, but I will continue with thoughts about Barcelona and the rest of Spain starting very soon. I want to write about Poblano, for example, which everybody is claiming is Barcelona's coolest neighborhood. I have a couple of doubts about that, but, we can talk about it. I also might end up talking a little bit about the recent developments in the Catalan situation, some of the politics. I don't know, we'll see what is interesting. Anything could happen here. There could be some huge story in the next week that derails all of these plans. But, we'll see. Also, it's election year in the US. If you're an American living abroad, you can go to votefromabroad.org to get your overseas ballot. Votefromabroad.org. I don't care who you vote for, but I think it's important that you vote. I'm not planning on turning this into a blog about politics, but I might end up mentioning something election related sooner or later. Anyway, thank you as always for listening. I appreciate it very much. And until next time, this is Daniel from beautiful Barcelona. Hasta la próxima.